When you play the Game of Thrones, you
subscribe and like,
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to our Robert's Rebellion series. It has been quite a little bit, so we're gonna do kind of to start this video a little bit of a catch up where we left off. And so in the last video, we left off with the tourney of Harrenhal, and specifically with Lyanna being crowned and seeing everyone's reaction to this event and why it was so important. And so to start the video off today, I'm going to be talking about where all of these characters kind of went, where they're going to be at the big starting of the abduction of Lyanna, and why all of that kind of matters, why that's important for me personally. And I want to say this video will be heavily inspired by In Deep Geek's video on how Robert's Rebellion started, and specifically how the information spread that Rhaegar abducted Lyanna. Not that it was like more of a mutual thing. So again, check that out if you would like to. It'll be linked in the video as well. And also, sorry for the late upload. It was supposed to go up Saturday, the day I'm recording this as of, but just didn't have time. So it's going to go up today on Sunday. But let's start. So again, let's do a recap. We're starting the year 282. And in the beginning of this, Brandon and Catelyn's wedding had been announced. So certain characters are kind of all in this area. Lyanna, we know, is still in the Riverlands, given where she and Rhaegar eventually meet up. We know that Ned is still in the Vale with Robert and Jon Arryn. We know that Rickard Stark is coming down south for Brandon's wedding. And so presumably you do have this deal where all of the Starks are probably going to be closing in on River Run pretty soon. And that's a really key point to figure out, okay, how does Rhaegar and Lyanna meet up, right? That's a pretty big point here. But other things we are going to see that are very important as well to talk about. Littlefinger challenges Brandon in a duel, again for Catelyn's hand because he was in love with her. This leaves him severely injured. Then, while being drunk, he sleeps with Lysa, thinking it was Catelyn as well. So a lot of things happen here, right? On one hand, you have Littlefinger actively trying to get Catelyn's hand, screwing up political marriages if it was successful, which it was definitely not going to be. And also then basically screwing up Lysa, who now she is in damaged goods, really. That's how, again, a lot of people view the society, and women, they have to be a virgin, right? If they are soiled goods, their value in a political marriage goes down quite a bit. Think about House of the Dragon, right? And how Rhaenyra is viewed after it is, appears that Daemon has taken her virginity, right? It's a really big deal for Viserys and the way he treats Daemon. And so this is really important to understand on why one, that Hoster Tully sends Littlefinger away, and two, why Brandon Stark would be really mad at Littlefinger, even besides what actually happens between the two and that rivalry that would have been there. And also you kind of look at some of the other things, right, where he's still pissed off at Rhaegar for crowning Lyanna. It's seen as a pretty heavy insult to, or that's the way he takes it anyway. And so there's a lot of things there to look at, as we'll talk about as we go further. But again, like I said before, we have Rickard Stark coming down from the south for their wedding. Again, presumably Ned and maybe even Robert probably could have been actually moving towards this wedding, but then when it doesn't happen, that doesn't exactly go down that way. We have Rhaegar, who is also, interestingly enough, presumably still in the Riverlands. Given at where they meet up and how all that goes down, it would appear Rhaegar does not go very far after Harrenhal. And this does make some sense, right? Given the way that his relationship with Aerys has completely broken down. It's really either he's in Dragonstone or he's kind of with his friends in the Riverlands at this point. Also to note is that the Kingsguard, some of them were probably with him during this time. At this, we have to think about, okay, the only Stark that is not accounted for is Benjen. Benjen is up north. He is the Stark that is left behind during this and will be for the rest of the conflict and the series. And so when we think about Benjen, and I talked about in the last video with the tourney of Harrenhal, this character that was so pivotal in Rhaegar and then Lyanna meeting, you have to think about this from his point of view. He's going to be very important, given that he knows that Rhaegar and Lyanna had this connection already, that it wasn't some kidnapping type thing. And so for him, there's a lot of guilt that's going to follow, but we'll talk about him a lot more as the series goes on. But let's get into more of what's going on here. So Littlefinger, after healing a bit from his wound, is sent home. We know that, again, that winter is here. he cannot make the journey home yet. Again, going on the East Road, pretty dangerous in the winter. It makes a lot of sense for him to stay at least somewhere during this time period. The most logical is the Crossroad Inns. It's the center part of everything. It's right before you get to the East Road. So again, makes sense for him to stay there. I think that's the logical point of which he would stay. Maybe you guys think something different, but I think that makes a lot of sense. I think In Deep Geek, and then we're going to talk about his theory specifically as we go forward now. This makes a lot of sense for me personally. The other interesting part of this is that we know Brandon Stark would have followed this exact route. Now, we're given that Brandon was going to meet his father, which makes a lot of sense, but there could be two birds with one stone here. Yes, he's going to be going up to see his father, bring him down, all of that, but two, here's this guy that just slept with Catelyn's sister, got her pregnant, and also was trying to take your woman. Like, there's a lot of reasons in which I think Brandon Stark, if he encounters Littlefinger on this journey, or maybe he even wanted to, he maybe would have beaten up Littlefinger, maybe done something else, maybe even killed him. He is very rash and bold, and we see his actions when it comes to Rhaegar and his family. He could have done something really, really bad here. Now, again, we do know Brandon's going to go this way, right? Because it's the most simple way. You go from Riverrun, you go to the Crossroad Inns, then you go up north from the King's Road, and you would have eventually met his father and the rest of the Starks coming down, or the rest of the men with him coming down south. And so I think it makes a lot of sense when you point to this idea of, okay, how do we get to this idea that Rhaegar captured Lyanna? How did that start? Right? And that's what I think doesn't make any sense. And then you also look at the idea of, okay, how come Brandon seems like the first person to know this out of everybody, right? Like, Rickard's, from what we hear of the histories, Ned didn't know it before Brandon, which again makes sense. He's in the Vale. News would get there a little bit slower than like a more central area. Rickard Stark doesn't get this information. It would appear before Brandon, or maybe he would have cautioned his son. That doesn't seem to happen. Even the Tullys, it doesn't seem like they learned this before Brandon, or even at the same time. So it makes us think that, okay, Brandon must have been much closer to the source than all of these other people, which again makes sense given that Brandon is probably going to be in the same area as Rhaegar and Lyanna were. And now we also have to do another thing, right? Is where would Rhaegar and Lyanna have met? I think there's a couple areas. I think it's not as set in stone that they may have met at the Crossroad Inns, but I think what's important here is I think that they would have stopped at the Crossroad Inns regardless. I think it makes sense. It's a central location. It makes sense for them to stop there along their way. And so we get to this point where, okay, they could have met at Harrenhal. We know that, again, one of Rhaegar's friends was a Went. He was in the Kingsguard. They seemed buddy-buddy. Again, the Wents are the ones that hold the tourney of Harrenhal. Makes a lot of sense. Maybe they could have met there. They also maybe could have just met up at the Crossroad Inns as well. Either way, regardless of where you think about what happened here, Littlefinger was a character that I think makes logical sense to be staying here until winter let up, right? And so, okay, let's say Littlefinger sees Rhaegar and Lyanna. He knows what both of them would have looked like, right? He was aware of what they looked like. So even if maybe they were trying to hide their disguises a little bit, he still would have known. And this is the other thing, right? We're not even sure if they would have been trying to hide their disguises, because at this point, it wasn't that big of a deal when you look at, like, okay, Rhaegar and Lyanna are together, right? That's not going to be a public outcry or anything like that. Like, maybe people will be upset by that, like Robert, like Brandon, but it's not something that's going to start a war, right? Because the two are willingly together. Lyanna might get a scolding, Rhaegar might get some ill will, but it's nothing that bad. So maybe they didn't even feel like they needed to hide themselves. That's possible as well. But either way, Littlefinger sees these and he doesn't do anything, right? Maybe he observes it and keeps that information in the back of his head. But then all of a sudden, here comes Brandon. Brandon comes in, he's pissed at Littlefinger. Maybe he gets up in Littlefinger's face, just like how we see Ned do, right? Just like we might even see someone like Jon do, like he did in the show. It's very Stark characteristic. They go straight to physical strength, right? And so what is the one thing that Littlefinger can do here to get Brandon off of his case? I love this point that Robert from In Deep Geek makes here, is that, like, okay, why not just say, oh, Rhaegar was with Lyanna, and maybe like that, maybe he didn't even do the lie, right? Maybe Brandon came to that lie, right? Maybe Brandon was like, there's no way Lyanna would go with Rhaegar. Rhaegar must have abducted her after he was doing this weird thing, crowning her the Queen of Beauty while he has a wife. That's possible, right? That's really, really possible. Now, this is where it kind of takes a turn, right? So again, we're not sure the extent of which Littlefinger maybe lied or didn't lie, but this could have been the building block for how Littlefinger plays the Game of Thrones. He realizes, okay, I've got to lie. I've got to turn family against family. That's how people are going to die and give me a chance to move up the ladder. And so what we end up seeing here is pretty clear. Brandon, in his anger, goes straight to King's Landing. Now, I think this is very interesting, given that Rhaegar does not seem like he was at King's Landing quite a lot. He kind of seems, again, very similar to the Blacks in the build up to the Dance of Dragons, to a lot of the times being on Dragonstone. So I do find it interesting that Brandon goes straight to King's Landing now. Maybe he could have been seeing maybe he could have been going there to, again, get the King's Justice, going straight to Aerys, but you also have to think, like, Aerys is not really in a good state right now. You just saw him at Harrenhal. Brandon wasn't the smartest guy here. And when he does end up getting to King's Landing, what does he do? Right? He doesn't handle it rationally at all. So Brandon and a few of his friends then head south to go to King's Landing, but when they do, he demands to see Prince Rhaegar, and Brandon even goes so far as threatening him with death, which is extremely stupid, right? Like, for one, Brandon doesn't know if he has the truth of it, right? He's heard something from maybe this rumor, but rumors are rumors, right? And Brandon's anger and his blind, again, he sees what he wants to see and who Rhaegar was as a person. And so instantly he thinks the worst of Rhaegar, kidnapping and trying to like rape his sister. And so Brandon here goes a step too far. And the worst part about this is, like, I don't even blame Aerys for taking Brandon prisoner. This guy just came up to your city, your capital, in front of all of these people. Kind of like if you look at Achilles in the movie Troy, very similar situation in what Brandon ends up doing, where he's going, okay, up to the gates, calling for Hector, if you're going off of the Achilles Troy movie. In this situation, it's Brandon going up, basically calling for Rhaegar's head. Aerys takes him prisoner, because why wouldn't he? This guy is basically spouting treason, regardless if it's true or not. And think about it from Aerys' point of view. He has no idea what this guy is talking about. And now I don't want to like take away and say that Aerys isn't mad at this point, because he is. Aerys is insane. Just given the way that Brandon and his father die, he was insane by this point. But even looking at this rationally, what is Aerys supposed to make of this? This guy comes up to your gate trying to kill your heir, or saying he wants to kill your son. You're going to put him in prison. That's what any rational person would do. The irrational stuff is going to happen as we get further. But I want to take a step back here. Let's look at Rhaegar and Lyanna here. Well, this doesn't really make any sense when you give it. Look at it from Rhaegar's POV. Rhaegar was trying to recreate the three heads of the dragon, and we know that Elia could not have any more kids. That's very apparent. If she had any more, there was a good chance she was going to die in childbirth. So there makes a lot of sense here that Rhaegar was trying to have another kid with another woman. But the problem is, why does he go for Lyanna, probably the worst person to do this with? And two, why doesn't he just, I don't know, go for a woman that he could just have as his, I don't know, his side woman, right? And say, Elia, I need another kid, right? That's the whole reason, right? Then it just seems like Rhaegar went too far with this. And maybe it's, again, part of this prophecy of A Song of Ice and Fire. Maybe Rhaegar came into his head that he needed a Stark because they are ice. Maybe that's what happened. Again, this is the hardest part of looking at Rhaegar's psychology here, because we don't know exactly what he was thinking. We can speculate, try to figure things out. Maybe he was trying to fit this Azor Ahai and he didn't think that it was Aegon yet. Maybe he thought it was going to be his kid with Lyanna. And even from Lyanna's side of this, it really feels like Lyanna got used in this situation. I don't think for a second that Rhaegar truly loved Lyanna. I think Rhaegar lusted after her and saw her as a means to an end, whereas Lyanna didn't know what she was really getting into, right? I don't think Lyanna thought things through that this could spark a war, right? Given how everything worked out at Harrenhal, Lyanna should have realized this was a big no-no. But again, Lyanna probably was blinded by her love and or crush of Rhaegar. We get this idea that she loved Rhaegar. She almost wept at his singing or his performance during Harrenhal. So yeah, I think Lyanna was someone that is very similar to, say, Sansa with Joffrey, where she just really enjoyed him, had a major crush on him, and just went along with all these things, even though they were really stupid. And maybe that's me putting a bit more sympathy on Lyanna and understanding for her. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about Lyanna in this situation, because I find Lyanna much more sympathetic, and that this was more Rhaegar using her than anything else. But who knows? Let me know what you guys think on that idea. So let's get back into, again, the narrative plot that's going on here. So this all happens. Brandon Stark, on the eve of his, marriage with Kat, he's now a prisoner at King's Landing. Now, if you're Rickard Stark, you're sitting here and you're in a real bad situation, because you've probably been getting all the reports that Aerys is not in his right mind. He's not the most sane anymore. He's not the same person he was during, say, the War of the Nine Penny Kings, or even in his early reign with Tywin. But what can you do? Right? Your son has been taken prisoner. You have to come answer for whatever he was doing. And so even though in the back of his mind, I think there's a possibility he thought, okay, this could be a trap. Right there, I think that possibility was there. But I think what he was banking on, which is what he ends up doing, is that if there is that situation, I will call a trial by combat. Still not a great plan, given that you had Jaime Lannister in his, maybe not his prime just yet, but entering his prime. You had Arthur Dayne on the Kingsguard. Like, you had some of the best sword fighter, Barristan as well, some of the best sword fighters of all time. So, like, I don't know how that would have gone for them, but maybe that was his backup plan, right? We see it's not going to go well. But Rickard Stark comes to King's Landing, and instantly he is made a prisoner. His men are killed for the most part, and now you're in even worse situation. The Lord of Winterfell has been captured, his heir has been captured, and now I think, if you even take another step back, think about this from Hoster Tully's point of view, Jon Arryn's point of view. These people are getting this news and going, okay, this is really what's been going on in the background. This breach of our alliance has just happened. The Starks have been completely targeted. We have the daughter of Rickard Stark is somewhere lost. It seems like she's abducted. Brandon, who is to marry Catelyn Tully, has now been captured. All of the preparations for war start happening at this point. Tywin, sitting back here, is going, oh shit, Aerys fucked up. Right, he fucked up. Now, I won't say again that open war has started, but I would say you see some of the things we see with, like, a Game of Thrones, right? Where the war hasn't, like, started yet, but, like, when Tyrion gets captured, preparing for war starts. The borders start, forming, right? The Lannister army starts forming in the west. You see the Tully starting to strengthen their borders. That kind of is what seems like's happening here, where it's like that preparation, where Jon Arryn almost probably is thinking this is going to get bad quickly if the way it happens. Now, with this, Rickard Stark demands a trial by combat. But Aerys is not playing by the rules. And as being cruel and as insane as he is, and again, I think you can justify his actions up to when Rickard Stark is captured, because again, Rickard Stark was coming to discuss, the crimes of his son. There was no reason to then imprison him, right? And again, if you're even looking for why Aerys would have done those things, just suspicion, right? Just feeling like, and paranoia that, okay, if Brandon Stark was willing to try and kill the Crown Prince, maybe Rickard Stark was complicit in that. Maybe he's the one that prompted Brandon to do that. And so what we end up seeing is Rickard was, put in his battle armor, but he was hung above a fire. So he would slowly melt in his armor and die. But not only that, Brandon, his son, was put in a Tyroshi strangling trap. And the more that Brandon tried to reach for his sword to free his father, the more he was strangled to death. A brutal, horrifying scene in the throne room, and all the while, no one did anything. As Brandon strangled himself, and Rickard melted and burned alive. And this was when there was really no way of stopping war. Very similar to Ned being killed by Joffrey, it's now personal, right? You've now taken that step that you cannot undo. And it gets even worse. Aerys then demands the heads of Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark. Now, the weirdest part is, why Robert Baratheon? The Starks, fair enough, I guess, because you're going against their whole family. Maybe you think Ned is complicit and this somewhat treason that Aerys has imagined. But why Robert? That doesn't really make any sense. Robert has not been part of this. Robert is the one betrothed to Lyanna, and the Starks and Baratheons have been pretty buddy-buddy. But why Robert? And Aerys, probably just paranoia, insanity, mixed with, okay, they're buddy-buddy. But Aerys demands both of their heads from Jon Arryn. And this is too much for Jon Arryn. Jon Arryn sees these two people as his sons. He's basically raised them from young ages. And now that you look at Robert and Ned not having any, fathers, or even any parents at this point, he feels responsible for them. And he denies Aerys calling his banners. Now, plot-wise, that will be where the video is going to end. And again, this is the last video before war. Right now, the rest of the videos that will be coming forward with Robert's Rebellion will be about the war. Everything going on and some of the after effects as well. But my biggest question in all of this is, what was Rhaegar doing? Did Rhaegar not realize that, regardless of what he was doing with Lyanna, that once this lie got out, that he abducted her, that was going to possibly cause war? And then when he hears that his father captures Brandon, he still doesn't come back. And this excuse can't be made that, well, maybe he was already in Dorne or whatnot. It's like, he probably traveled south, whether it was by ship or by, horse. He would have gone by the capital. He could have stopped, cleared up everything that was going on, and stopped it in its tracks before it did. But he doesn't. It's almost as if he allows this war to happen. Or was it that he was so overconfident and so bold, like we see with Jaime talking with Rhaegar right before the battle for the Trident? What was going on here? Did Rhaegar not care? Did Rhaegar believe, I can stop this whole war? What did then Lyanna think, right? Or was Lyanna just in the dark? Did she not know what was going on? That because of her and Rhaegar, her father was captured and her brother was captured, and then they were killed in a brutal, dishonorable fashion. What was Lyanna thinking at this point? That's my biggest question that I have here, is that while all this is all going on, did information not reach Rhaegar and Lyanna what was going on? Did they not think they might have any repercussions from what was happening? But either way, war starts. And so many things had to happen that we've talked about in all of these videos. That's why getting to this point where Robert's Rebellion starts takes so many parts, because it's not just one thing that starts it. Yes, Rhaegar abducting Lyanna is the thing that really sparks it, and, all the events at King's Landing following. But how do we get to this point where there are factions? How do we get to these points where Aerys is mad? How do we get to the point where Tywin is sitting out the war? How do we get to this point where the Baratheons go from being Stark Targaryen men to Stark men, to Tully people, to Arryn men? All of that was key to understand to get to this point where war happens. The Targaryens go from one of the most prosperous reigns in the first half of Aerys' reign to open war, something that will have the Targaryens out of power very shortly. So thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed. Again, I apologize for this video being about, a day late or whatnot. And I hope you guys all enjoy this series. We'll be getting into the main coverage of the actual war in the coming weeks and or months. And I hope to see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.